Mark 15:16-21. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is, the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross.
There's a painful irony in that passage, isn't there? The claims that the soldiers were mocking, well, they were in fact correct. Yes, Jesus is the incarnate God. Yes, he is the King of Kings, because yes, he is the King over all creation. And so yes, he's deserving of a purple robe, and yes, he is deserving of a crown, and yes, he is deserving of our acknowledgement. Hail, King of the Jews. And yet the robe draped over him, the crown placed on him, and the acknowledgement offered to him, they're all done to publicly shame and ridicule him. What about the other side of this equation? Not the ones who are doing the shaming, but the one who is being shamed. What is it like to be Jesus in this moment? Because here the thing that's being shamed isn't something that he has done. The thing that he is being shamed for is something who he is. Jesus is the Messiah. He is the King of Kings, and he is the Lord of Lords. That is an unchangeable aspect of who he is, and yet that core part of his identity has been taken and turned into a source of shame. When I was younger, I worked in a large church. I got into a conversation with a lead pastor about a point of theology in which we differed, and at that point in my training, I had both more and more recent theological training than he had, which meant that I was able to argue my point more convincingly than he was able to argue his. And knowing this, he got up and he left. And as he left in front of the other staff members who were present, and there were a couple dozen of them, he accused me of having the spirit of intellectualism. On Myers-Briggs, it's a personality type. I come out as being a more thinker than a feeler. It's just how I engage through the world. I do so through a thinking rather than a feeling lens. And so it's probably unsurprising that that's how I naturally feel close to God as well. I feel close to him when I am thinking about him and learning about him. But in that moment, when faced with the potential shame of being shown up by a subordinate, that pastor used his power to take a core part of who I am and how I relate to God and ascribed to it demonic attributes, turning part of my personality into a source of public shame. Have you experienced something like that before? The kind of shame that goes beyond mere embarrassment to becoming a kind of violation. As a good God-given part of who you are is publicly trashed by someone who hasn't been given permission to that part of who you are. That was a painful experience for me. And yet the violating shame that I experienced didn't go as nearly as far or as deep as it did for Jesus. The part of who he wasn't a personality trait. It was the core fundamental identity of what made him him. That he was the incarnate Messiah. That core, most central defining attribute of who he was being trashed far more comprehensively and far more publicly than was the case with me. For him, that experience of violating shame, it was rounded off by being spat at, beaten, till his flesh was torn to ribbons. He absorbed this because he thought that you were worth it. The true King of creation, the one deserving of robes and crowns and public acknowledgement. He endured violating shame and pain because he thought that you were worth it. How does that make you feel? What thoughts does that bring to your mind? Let me encourage you to take those thoughts and those feelings and offer them to God in prayer this hour. But also to pause for a moment and to listen for how he might respond.